What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors walks into what he thinks is a friendly interview, only to find himself caught in a verbal ambush that would make his Twilight co-stars cringe? What you're about to witness is the moment Robert Pattinson's legendary composure finally cracked on live television. And believe me, you've never seen anything quite like this before. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets wilder with every single word that comes out of their mouths. The atmosphere in the View studio that morning felt different. There was an electric tension in the air that even the seasoned production crew couldn't shake. Robert Pattinson sat in the guest chair, his usual calm demeanor intact as he adjusted his jacket. He had come prepared to discuss his latest film project, a psychological thriller already generating serious Oscar buzz. What he wasn't prepared for was Joy Behar's agenda. "So, Robert," Joy began, her voice carrying that familiar tone regular viewers knew meant trouble was coming. "I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me for weeks now." Robert tilted his head slightly, still polite. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "Well," Joy continued, leaning forward with a predatory grace of someone who believed she'd cornered her target, "I've been reading about your latest film, and I have to say, I'm concerned about the message it's sending to young people, especially young women who still see you as that vampire heartthrob." The co-hosts exchanged uneasy glances. This was not part of the pre-interview discussion. Whoopi shifted in her seat, clearly sensing danger. "I'm sorry," Robert said, confusion threading through his calm British tone. "What message are you referring to exactly?" Joy's eyes lit up with the kind of gleam someone gets right before dropping a bombshell. "The message that it's okay for men to manipulate and gaslight women, which is exactly what your character does throughout the film. And honestly, given your past playing a controlling vampire boyfriend, I find it troubling that you keep choosing these problematic roles." The studio fell silent, except for the soft hum of rolling cameras. Robert's jaw tightened, nearly imperceptible, but his voice remained steady. "Joy, I think there might be some misunderstanding. Have you actually seen the film?" "I've seen enough," Joy snapped back. "I've read the reviews. I've talked to people who have seen it. And frankly, I don't need to sit through 2 hours of watching a woman get psychologically tortured to know it's not something we should be celebrating." "But that's exactly the point of the film," Robert replied, his voice sharpening. "It's meant to expose those behaviors, not celebrate them. The character I play is clearly the antagonist. The entire narrative is built around showing how damaging manipulation can be." Joy scoffed loudly, the sound cutting through the studio like a challenge. "Oh, please, Robert. Dress it up with all the fancy film school talk you want, but at the end of the day, you're still profiting off women's trauma. And the fact that you can't see that is part of the problem." That was the moment the camera caught something change in Robert's eyes. His polite mask stayed on, but something far sharper flickered behind it. "Joy, I respect your right to have an opinion about films you choose not to watch," he said. "But I find it incredibly irresponsible for someone with your platform to make sweeping judgments based on secondhand information." "Irresponsible?" Joy's voice jumped an octave. She leaned back, theatrically offended. "I'll tell you what's irresponsible, Robert." "What's irresponsible is a grown man who built his career playing a stalker vampire, now taking roles where he gets to psychologically torment women for entertainment. What's irresponsible is pretending it's artistic when it's the same misogynistic garbage wrapped in indie film pretension." The co-hosts looked ready to sink into the floor. Sarah tried to speak, but Robert was already responding. "That's an interesting perspective, Joy," he said, voice calm but edged with steel. "Especially coming from someone who's spent decades making a living tearing down other people on national television. If we're talking about exploitation and profiting off controversy, I think your own career might be worth examining." The studio gasped. Joy's mouth fell open, but Robert wasn't finished. "You know what I find truly irresponsible? A talk show host who ambushes guests with personal attacks disguised as social commentary. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my work, But it's clear you had no intention of having an actual conversation. You just wanted to grandstand and create a moment for your highlight reel. Joy recovered quickly, her voice dripping with condescension. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy for asking tough questions. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Robert. The minute someone challenges you, you turn it around and make yourself the victim. It's classic manipulation. And frankly, it's proving my point perfectly. Your point? Robert laughed, though there was no humor in it. Your point seems to be that you can say whatever you want about someone's work and character without doing even the most basic research. And then, when they defend themselves, you claim they're being manipulative. That's not journalism, Joy. That's just bullying, with better lighting. The tension in the studio was thick enough to slice through. Every camera was locked on the two combatants, capturing every micro-expression and verbal strike. The other co-hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to step in or let the train wreck keep unfolding. Bullying? Joy shot back, her face flushed and her voice rising. You want to talk about bullying? You've made millions playing characters who intimidate and control women. And now you're sitting here trying to intimidate me for calling you out. The only difference is I'm not some helpless character in one of your movies. I'm not going to be silenced by your pretty boy charm and your victim complex. Victim complex, Robert repeated, his composure dangling by a thread. Joy, you've spent the last several minutes attacking my character, my career choices, and my integrity, based on a film you openly admit you haven't even watched. You've accused me of promoting violence against women, of being manipulative, of exploiting trauma for profit. And when I try to correct your mischaracterizations, you accuse me of playing the victim. Do you see the irony here? The only thing I see, Joy snapped, is a privileged actor, upset that someone finally had the courage to call him out on his garbage. You can sit there in your expensive suit and use all the big words you want, but at the end of the day, you're just another Hollywood pretty boy who thinks he's above criticism. That last remark hit deeper than she expected. Robert's hands, which had been resting casually, slowly curled into fists. His jaw tightened, and when he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. Above criticism, he repeated, each word deliberate. Joy, I've been sitting here listening to you tear apart everything, from my career choices to my moral character. I've responded to every accusation with facts and explanations. I've tried to engage with your concerns in good faith, even though it became obvious, almost immediately, that you weren't interested in a real discussion. So please tell me, how exactly am I acting like I'm above criticism? Joy waved her hand dismissively, emboldened by what she interpreted as his rising frustration. Oh, spare me the wounded artist routine. You're acting like I'm attacking you personally, when all I'm doing is pointing out that your choices have consequences. You can't hide behind artistic integrity when people call you out for glorifying toxic masculinity. Glorifying toxic masculinity? Robert's voice finally rose, snapping the studio to attention. Joy, have you listened to a single word I've said? The film condemns the behavior you're accusing me of promoting. The character is the villain. He's punished. The entire story is about a woman finding the strength to escape his manipulation. But you wouldn't know that, because you chose to form your opinion based on gossip and headlines, instead of actually engaging with the work you're so eager to condemn. I don't need to watch propaganda to know what it is, Joy retorted. Joy shot back, her voice growing shriller with every exchange. And frankly, I'm tired of men like you lecturing women about what we should and shouldn't be offended by. You don't get to decide whether your work is harmful to women. We do. Men like me? Robert's voice had turned ice cold, and everyone could see the storm gathering behind his eyes. What exactly does that mean, Joy? What kind of man am I, in your expert opinion? Joy leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. You're the kind of man who thinks he can charm his way out of accountability. You're the kind of man who gets defensive and hostile the moment a woman challenges you. You're the kind of man who profits off stories about women being hurt and then acts surprised when women have a problem with it. The silence that followed, felt endless. Robert stared at her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "You want to know what kind of man I am, Joy?" "I'm the kind of man who spent 6 months working with domestic violence counselors to make sure my performance was accurate and respectful. I'm the kind of man who insisted that part of the film's profits go to organizations that support abuse survivors. I'm the kind of man who has used his platform to speak out against the very behaviors you're accusing me of promoting. But you wouldn't know that, because you're too busy building straw men to tear down on national television." Joy's face reddened, but she pushed ahead. "Oh, how convenient. Now suddenly you're a champion for women's rights. Where was all this noble activism when you were playing Edward Cullen, teaching teenage girls that stalking was romantic?" That did it. Robert shot to his feet so fast his chair rolled backward. The sudden movement triggered a collective gasp across the studio. His hands trembled with barely contained rage as he leaned forward, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. "How dare you?" The words came out as a growl, and the fury radiating off him was unmistakable. "How dare you sit there and reduce my entire career to some twisted narrative you've constructed in your head? I was 19 when I was cast in Twilight. I was a teenager taking the biggest role of my life, and I've spent the 15 years since then trying to use whatever influence that role gave me to do meaningful work. I've chosen projects that challenge harmful stereotypes and tell stories that matter. But none of that fits your narrative, does it, Joy?" She tried to interrupt, but Robert's voice rose, overpowering hers, his British accent sharpening as his anger crested. "No, you don't get to talk now. You've spent the entire segment talking. It's my turn." The other co-hosts sat frozen, unable to look away from the verbal wreckage unfolding before them. "You want to lecture me about accountability? Fine, let's talk about accountability, Joy. You've built a career on manufacturing outrage and tearing people down for sport. You've made a living stirring controversy where none existed. And now you're sitting here trying to destroy someone's reputation based on willful ignorance and malicious assumptions? I'm not trying to destroy anyone, Joy protested. But her voice had lost its earlier bite. Really? Robert's laugh was bitter and sharp. Then what would you call this? You ambushed me with false accusations, attacked my character, dismissed every explanation without a second thought, and when I defended myself, you labeled me manipulative and hostile. If this isn't character assassination, then what is it? Joy's face had gone from red to pale, though she still refused to back down. It's called holding celebrities accountable for their choices. You're not a victim here, Robert. Accountable for what? His voice was reaching a fever pitch, and the cameras captured every second of the controlled destruction of Joy's argument. For making a film you refuse to see? For taking roles that challenge audiences? For trying to use my platform responsibly? What am I being held accountable for, Joy, other than being successful enough to catch your attention? You're being held accountable for perpetuating harmful narratives about women, Joy insisted, though even she seemed to realize how flimsy the claim sounded now. Robert slammed his hand on the table, the crack echoing through the silent studio. What narratives, Joy? You keep saying I'm perpetuating harmful narratives, but you can't name a single one because you haven't done your homework. You're just repeating buzzwords and hoping they stick. The camera zoomed in on both of their faces, capturing Joy's growing discomfort and Robert's barely contained fury. The other co-hosts looked like they were watching a car crash in slow motion, unable to look away, and completely powerless to stop it. I don't have to justify my concerns to you, Joy said, her voice now defensive instead of confrontational. No, you don't, Robert replied, his voice dropping into that dangerous low calm. But you do have a responsibility to your audience, to base those concerns on facts, not fiction. You have a responsibility to the people whose careers you attack to at least understand what you're attacking. And you have a responsibility to yourself to be better than this petty, vindictive performance you've put on today. Joy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly struggling to find a response that wouldn't make things worse. But Robert wasn't finished. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Joy?" he continued, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward. "You had an opportunity to have a meaningful conversation about representation in media, about the responsibility artists have to their audiences, about the complex relationship between entertainment and social issues. Instead, you turned it into a circus act designed to humiliate your guest and generate clips for social media." Joy finally managed to speak, though it came out as more of a croak.
"I was trying to have that conversation. You're the one who got defensive and started attacking me personally."
Robert's eyes narrowed. When he spoke again, each word was sharpened to cut. "I got defensive? Joy, you opened this segment by accusing me of promoting violence against women. You called my work misogynistic garbage. You suggested that my career choices make me complicit in harming women. You questioned my moral character, my integrity, my motivations, and you did all that while admitting you haven't even bothered to watch the work you're condemning. When I tried to explain the actual content and context of my film, you dismissed everything as manipulation or victim playing. If that's your idea of a constructive conversation, then we clearly have different definitions of dialogue." Whoopi Goldberg finally stepped in, her voice tentative. "Maybe we should all take a breath." "No," Robert cut her off, his gaze locked on Joy. "We're not taking a breath. We're finishing this conversation. Because Joy clearly has more to say. Don't you, Joy? You've been building up to something this entire time. You didn't bring me here to talk about my film. You brought me here to make a point. So go on. Make it." Joy's face flushed with anger and humiliation. "Fine. You want my point? Here it is. You've spent your entire career playing men who hurt women, and now you want to call it art. You've made millions off the fantasy of male dominance and female submission, and when someone calls you out, you throw a tantrum like a spoiled child." The studio fell silent, so silent you could hear the cameras humming. Robert stood perfectly still, unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "There it is, the real Joy Behar, ladies and gentlemen. When the facts don't support your narrative, you resort to personal insults. When your arguments fall apart, you attack the person instead of addressing the issue. And when someone refuses to be bullied into agreeing with you, you call them a spoiled child." He paused, letting every word hit. "You're right about one thing. I have made millions of dollars in my career, and I've used that money to support causes I believe in, to help people who need it, and to make films that challenge audiences to think differently. What have you done with your platform, Joy, besides tear people down and create division?" Joy's face went pale. "How dare you question my contributions?" Joy snapped, her voice trembling more from panic than authority. "I've been fighting for women's rights longer than you've been alive." "Have you?" Robert's voice sliced through the air like a scalpel. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been fighting for your own relevance by attacking anyone who threatens to overshadow you. You've built a career on manufacturing outrage and exploiting controversy. And when that well runs dry, you create new controversies out of thin air." "That's not true," Joy stammered. But even she didn't seem convinced by her own words. "Isn't it?" Robert pressed, relentless. "Tell me, Joy, when was the last time you used this platform to actually help someone instead of tearing them down? When was the last time you invited a guest here to celebrate their work instead of ambushing them with gotcha questions? When was the last time you focused on building something positive instead of destroying anything that threatens your narrative?" Joy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The other co-hosts stared at her in horror as she visibly struggled to defend herself. Robert leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a quiet but razor-sharp whisper that carried across the entire studio. "You want to talk about toxic behavior, Joy? Look in the mirror. You want to talk about people who hurt others for entertainment? You've turned character assassination into an art form. You want to talk about accountability? Then take responsibility for the damage you do to people's lives and careers with your reckless accusations and willful ignorance. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," Joy said, starting to rise. End quote. "Actually, you do." Robert's calm, cold tone froze her mid-motion. "You started this. You brought me here under false pretenses. You attacked my character and my work without doing a minute of research. And you've spent the last 30 minutes trying to drag my reputation through the mud on national television. The least you can do is sit there and listen to the consequences of your actions." Joy slowly sank back into her chair, looking smaller than she ever had on air. Robert straightened, adjusting his jacket with quiet control. "You know what the most pathetic part of this whole performance has been? You could have been better. You could have asked thoughtful questions about the film. You could have engaged with the actual themes and ideas. You could have had a meaningful discussion about representation and responsibility in entertainment. Instead, you went for the cheap shot, the easy headline, your ego over genuine discourse." He paused, letting the silence thicken around them. "I came here ready for honest conversation, ready to engage with difficult questions. What I found instead was a host more interested in performing for her audience than engaging with her guest. That's not journalism. That's not activism. That's cruelty dressed up as righteousness." The camera caught the exact second Joy's composure shattered not from sadness, but from the realization that she had been publicly and completely defeated. Robert stepped back, his voice returning to its normal calm but still edged with steel. "I think we're done here. Joy, I truly hope you take time to reflect on what happened today. Not for me, but for every future guest who walks onto this stage expecting basic dignity and professional courtesy." He turned directly to the camera. "For anyone watching who genuinely wants to judge my film, go see it for yourself. Think for yourself. Don't let a critic, a host, or even me tell you what to think about art. Engage with it. Question it. Form your own opinion." With that, Robert Pattinson walked off the View stage, leaving behind a stunned studio, a humiliated host, and what would become one of the most talked-about television moments of the year. The cameras lingered as Joy sat frozen in silence, the co-hosts exchanging horrified glances, and the audience still trying to process what they had just witnessed.